One of the great things about technology is that it has the potential to empower everybody. And so when we're thinking about and designing future mobility networks, we need to be doing so in a way that prioritises access for all and ensures that nobody's left behind.
Mobility is such a big driver of positive outcomes for society, but it comes at a huge cost. So more so than many other sectors, collaboration within mobility to achieve those outcomes whilst reducing those costs is absolutely pivotal.
And so the key thing for insurers is that we effectively act as enablers right across the market. Whether it's access to data, whether it's access and sourcing spare parts to repair customers' cars, or finding the right product to support their connected journey, insurers are right at the centre.
Thank you so much for that. Very nice to have you all up here. We're all needing a little more water than we might have done this morning. Apparently the temperature has been turned down, ladies and gentlemen, so any minute now we're going to be putting our sweaters back on. But listen, welcome. Thank you so much. Johannes, thank you for that introduction to the, sort of the role of telecoms in the infrastructural sort of needs, if you like, to make automotive happen. Now, we've got representatives from all the necessary sectors here, and so it's going to be fascinating to hear your thoughts. Amelia, let's start with you. You come from the perspective of obviously financing innovative tech. Do we have the right environment here for more deep tech companies to succeed and flourish?
Yeah, thank you, and good afternoon. My name is Amelia Armour. So I'm a partner at a venture capital firm. So venture capital is the earlier stage of high-risk equity funding, which will come into a startup. And we've been around for sort of over 25 years and have been backing companies in computer vision, developing sensors that might go into battery systems, novel materials which might be used for new batteries. And throughout that period, a lot of our companies have come from academia. And so one of the exciting things about being based in the UK is that we have 7 out of the top 10 universities in Europe based in the UK. So this great startups ecosystem where we have really disruptive science-based technologies being generated in these great academic institutions here. And what has developed over that time is an ecosystem around those companies. So we have accelerators, tech transfer teams, angel investors. We have the EIS scheme here, which over $2 billion a year comes from the EIS scheme to support these companies. So we have this great base for starting technology companies in the UK, and that's extremely exciting. And so, yes, I would say we're very optimistic about that and the technologies that are coming from our leading universities. And today we focused a lot on AI, and that's extremely important in the UK. A number of institutions here and universities focused on leading AI and different types of AI, which can feed into vehicle simulations, traffic simulations, which can all speed up deployment and add productivity tools.
Sounds very positive, which is great. Thank you for that, Amelia. Now let's turn to Joe from What 3 Words. Hello.
Hi.
In your opinion, what role will digital address systems play in enabling autonomous mobility?
Yeah, granted, I'm sure address systems are not keeping people up here at night, but obviously, What 3 Words, we're all
say that in this room. Maybe they are.
We're all about precise location, so it's something we're thinking about a lot. And if you think about how we all get around today, maps play a big part in that, right? And they've evolved and improved over time. So unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember the A to Z guides in the back of the car. And then we sort of moved to like printing out Google Maps directions. It was a weird time when we did that. And now we've just got the power of like GPS maps in the palm of our hands, in our smart devices, in our cars, right? So maps have improved over time. But the maps are only as good as the addresses. And so the address systems that we use, they haven't kind of kept pace, right? They haven't changed. Most of us are still using street addresses, postcodes here in the UK. And street addresses were invented in the 1700s for tax and policing purposes, postcodes in the 60s for sorting posts. So in the absence of like a better solution, we've kind of got like a square peg, round hole situation, right? Where we're using these sort of legacy address systems for use cases that just could never have been conceived when those address systems were created, right? I mean, in the 60s, nobody knew we were going to have ride-hailing services, food delivery, e-commerce, right? So, yeah, I think the traditional address systems that we're using today, they're not fit for purpose for even today in many cases, right? You know, my parents live in rural Somerset. Their postcode spans 4 different houses over a mile radius, and the couriers can never find them. So I think, you know, a lot of people sort of share that frustration with traditional addresses today. And so if they're not kind of fit for purpose in today's world, they're certainly not going to be kind of future-proofed for a world in which we're fully autonomous.
I mean, I live in the middle of nowhere, and What 3 Words has definitely changed our delivery drivers' lives. This has been a very positive, you know, personal impact for me. But how are you working with the autonomous vehicle world, though? Have you started engaging with them?
I mean, I think where we are today is we are pretty well adopted here in the UK. In the automotive sector, we now have 16 OEMs that are signed with What 3 Words, so they either have What 3 Words in the navigation system or it will come in future models. So we have millions of cars all over the world that already have What 3 Words enabled. So if you own a Jaguar, a Land Rover, Mitsubishi, Subaru, if you can afford a Lamborghini, they all have What 3 Words enabled in the car. And so what that means is that once someone's given you a 3-word address, like with any address, you can basically, in a Mercedes, for example, you can say, hey, Mercedes, navigate to What 3 Words, table, chair, spoon, for example. And it's going to navigate you to a very specific 3-meter location. Might be worth sort of explaining it. Maybe not everyone here has heard of What 3 Words, but essentially how the system works is we've divided the entire world into 3 by 3 meter squares, and then we've assigned every square in the world with 3 random words in English and 59 other languages. So those words are fixed, and essentially a kind of shorthand way of thinking about it is it's you know, like GPS coordinates, but with words. So it's very precise, but very easy for humans to input those 3 words into a device and then get from A to B very precisely. You know, not many people are navigating around using GPS coordinates. You know, I don't say, come to mine for dinner, I'm at 51.473182. So that's the whole concept with What 3 Words, is a really human-friendly way of sharing a very precise location.
Okay, that's a very good explanation. And so, as you said, already in quite a lot of different cars,
yeah.
But the future is there. Okay, insurance, Lee, from Aviva. We've talked about this sort of in passing. There have been a lot of references today already. Yeah. But tell us how you, as a company, are now looking at the implications of this new vehicle technology and how it's going to work, because it is a whole, it's like rewriting the rule book completely, isn't it?
It does rewrite the rule book. So Aviva, the largest insurer in the UK, we've got about 4% of our vehicle park that are currently electric. And our experience so far, just dealing with that vehicle park, is that essentially they pretty much cost the same to repair. The time to repair is about the same. And we're obviously building some experience and some learnings from dealing with that particular park. It's obviously an interim position because that park is going to change. Autonomous is a completely different set of rules, set of technology. And one thing that's really important to us when it comes to customers is having them confident that when they make a decision and they want to be part of owning an autonomous vehicle, that the journey is going to be seamless, it's going to work, we can repair them, we can get the spare parts, and it's not adverse compared to other models, because as you said in one of your comments earlier, it's a mixed park and will be for a lot of years to come. And that doesn't matter whether you're Waymo in the US or you're Aviva in the UK. We're all going to be operating within a vehicle park that is completely mixed up. And the safety aspects of that and the ability to get at sensors, to get at technology in vehicles easily if you're repairing those cars. So we have our own repair network called Solus, so we have insight into what it costs us to repair electric versus ICE cars, and we can work out Are we being overcharged for spare parts simply because it's electric? And we'll have that visibility going forward around how we operate. But the challenges really are that obviously manufacturers need to think about the ease of repair, where they put sensors, can you get at them to test them easily, and can they be swapped out in the event of repair? And Weber mentioned the issue of driving an autonomous car that has been involved in an accident and not knowing whether sensors have or haven't been affected. And those tests, that assessment, are critical to allowing consumers to have confidence that this is going to be something that is sustainable. We've operated a joint venture with Darwin in a science park in Oxfordshire, 2 driverless shuttles. We've just added a second shuttle because the whole point about autonomous is working out not just how one car works with the network and talks and shares data back to base, how do both of them talk to each other? And the issue is going to be latency as we increase the number of autonomous cars around the quantity of data that's being shared, not just between individual cars and, say, manufacturers or authorities. It's very much between cars and between connected devices such as smart traffic lights. And I'm reminded that when you drive in Italy and you might exceed the speed limit going through a village in Italy, what happens is the traffic lights turn red because they pick up the speed. The problem is they turn red for the car behind you, not for the car that's gone through at speed, because they're not picking things up quickly enough. But if you extrapolate that out for autonomous, it's going to be a challenge around sheer amount of data being processed in real time so that autonomous cars can make the right decision in the right circumstances. And our Darwin project and how it works is learning about shadow, cats suddenly appearing, leaves blowing across paths, because those things don't happen on isolated autonomous railway systems, for example, which autonomous cars are obviously compared to that. Well, we've already got those. It's not such a big jump.
For somebody using an autonomous vehicle, I think one of the first questions to their insurer would be, well, what happens if something goes wrong? Who's to blame? I mean, how do you insure against AI? I mean, what's the story there?
Yes, so this is a critical part of what the industry is asking for around certainty as to what happens around cyber risk. It's one of the 4 asks that the industry has focused on in the report that actually landed this morning as you were meeting from the ABI in Thatcham. It's a brilliant report. Have a look at it. It's got some great visuals in there, some really simplistic descriptions of where liability rests. And of course, an autonomous car in autonomous mode is insured by the insurer, it's not the responsibility of the driver. The issue is, how do you determine which mode it was in, and did the driver interfere with something, or did something else go wrong? And it's that access to data that is going to be key for all of us, I think, in the room, so that we can quickly determine fault and cause, and then, if you're the consumer in that mix, where do I fit when I make my claim? Because something's happened that was unexpected. Because exactly what happened is going to be critical. It's much more tricky to find that out in an autonomous car setting.
You're going to have to retrain the ombudsman, aren't you?
We're going to need a new ombudsman, obviously. That's obviously something that the legislation is looking at. We've got the bill currently in committee stage for autonomous cars. It's obviously disappointing for everybody that it's coming at the end of a parliament, but at least it's going through. Cross-party support. So for those MPs in the room, they already know the importance of making sure that legislation lands. But then there's a whole host of regulated legislation that needs to be implemented, probably in the next parliament, to make this properly work and properly operate. And the ombudsman and the regulator are key to that outcome.
You mentioned cybersecurity, and Andrew from SBD Automotive, you're very well placed to answer some of these questions. What do you feel the most acute security challenges that are existing now for modern vehicles and connected infrastructure?
Yeah, so just as a quick background, we are a tech consultancy and we're helping Nissan at the moment launch the UK's first robo-taxi service in London, which has been a lot of fun. And we're kind of supporting by looking at how we can make sure that it's secure. Just to take a step back though, connected cars aren't new. We've had cellular technology in cars since the 90s, right? ADAS systems aren't new. We've had those in the car since the 90s too. And over those 30 years or so, cars generally haven't been hacked. There have been a lot of ways of hacking that have been demonstrated academically, but we haven't seen the same kind of attacks as we've seen in other industries like banking or like insurance or like in retail. And I've got a theory about that. I think it's because hackers are very, very pragmatic, generally speaking. They think through the lens of effort and reward, right? And the effort associated over the last 30 years in hacking cars has been quite intense, not because car companies have necessarily done anything particularly well, but actually, ironically, because the networks, if you look at any of your cars today, or most of your cars today, it's a really complicated mesh of networks, legacy networks, dozens of computers on top of each other, and every new model that comes out, the vehicle manufacturer typically takes what they've done before, they adjust it, they build another network on top, or another computer on top. And so from an effort point of view, it's a lot of work for not a very large number of vehicles, and the reward just isn't there. That's starting to change now, though, that effort-reward balance. And I think with autonomous vehicles, there's a few factors that are kind of playing into that. One is that in order to make vehicles more autonomous, we're having to make vehicles more software-defined. So software is playing a much bigger part of the vehicle makeup. And that means abstracting software from hardware. So you'll no longer get 30, 40, 50 computers in your car. You only get a couple of computers that then get carried across all of the vehicles, all of the different models. And so there's a sharing of software and a sharing of vehicle platforms across model lines, which is increasing the attack plane. It does give vehicle manufacturers more ability to control security. It's no longer security by obscurity, which is what we've had for the last 30 years. They can design in security more clearly, but it is increasing the kind of attack plane for hackers. The other kind of risk that's coming in is as we shift more towards a software-defined vehicle, the ecosystem is changing. So in the olden days, it was kind of a big pyramid with the car company on top with a bunch of tier 1 suppliers and a bunch of tier 2 suppliers and a bunch of tier 3 suppliers. And that created a level of control over what was in the car that is slowly being eroded. So the ecosystem now, when it comes to software, is much more of a complex web of different players that becomes harder to kind of connect and harder to control when it comes to cybersecurity. And then the third factor that's playing into the kind of growing risk when it comes to autonomous vehicles is a number of external things that are connecting to the car. So again, connectivity over the last 3 decades has primarily been about either a cellular connection in the car connecting to the mobile networks or with your Bluetooth. But now the number of connections is growing a lot more. You've got a lot more things like whether that be EV charging points or whether that be V2X infrastructure like we heard about earlier that are connecting to the car that are creating more potential risks. So personally, I think the ability for car companies to control cybersecurity is increasing, their capabilities are increasing, but the risk is also increasing. And we will have heard a lot today about the value of autonomous vehicles. So if you look at that balance of effort and reward, a hacker will look at that value that we're talking about in terms of the billions and billions of potential revenue that will be generated or value that will be created. They'll look at it the opposite way. And I say, oh, if it's worth that much, it makes it even more useful to hack. So I think the effort-reward balance is changing, and it's going to be a tough few years ahead to make sure we keep that trust with consumers.
And the perhaps slightly more fanciful sort of sci-fi scenario that is mentioned by a lot of people, the sort of the bad actors coming in saying, we'd like to gridlock central London, so we're going to somehow take over all those autonomous vehicles. I mean, is that in any way realistic? Is that something that you worry about?
As I said, it's not today, just that effort reward isn't there. So practically, yes, you could, but it would take just such a large pool of hackers to get across all of the different vehicle brands, all of the different vehicle models, all the different networks. I think the more likely situation is that you break down trust by attacking a small segment of vehicles. And that then kind of cascades into big problems for the brands. And we've seen some of that with Jaguar Land Rover. with their phone key system becoming really targeted by vehicle thieves, it doesn't take much for that to turn into consumers getting very nervous, insurers getting very nervous, and things starting to deteriorate. So, I don't think we are close to hackers taking over the world, but I don't think that's what we should be probably most worried about in the very short term.
I must say, in a panel about collaboration, the last thing I want to do is to sort of freak people out about all the things that could go wrong. Yeah. But no, thank you for that. Absolutely fascinating. Now, Johannes, you set up a very, very interesting presentation about the need for the sort of the infrastructural technology. Where do you think you set out what the problems are and the challenges, but what's going to happen next? How close are we to that working well?
The telecommunications infrastructure is a fundamental topic, which is needed, by the way, also for cybersecurity. That is one of the big assets the car OEMs, each of the car OEMs have, that security need to be monitored continuously. If something goes wrong at a certain piece of your fleet, you need to recognize this immediately to take action on this. It should be not a hidden thing. And therefore, that is one of the very important, let's say, bricks in the whole connected environment, that each of the car manufacturer, each of the one who is operating a fleet, I'm pretty sure Waymo is operating a security operations center, which is detecting all these kind of transactions to the vehicle and from the vehicle to make sure that everything works safe. And if some anomalies are detected, you need to take action. So, with respect to these kind of infrastructures which create a fundamental business value for the customers, of course, also all the mobile networks operators are motivated to make their investments into this network infrastructure, to enable all over the place, and this is not only working in Greater London, it needs to work also in the remote areas of Scotland or Outer Hebrides or something like these areas, where the networks need to be available and need to do their job. And also, and that is maybe a second fundamental topic, because all of us are perceiving normally the networks as a normal consumer. And from a normal consumer perspective, sometimes something goes wrong. Everybody knows this. There are hiccups, call drops, and all these kind of things. So we need to learn also, and this is already an ongoing exercise since years in the network operator community, that best effort, we are calling it for the end consumers, best effort networks are a history. We should not offer our networks in a way that all the customers are treated the same. The cars, autonomous driving vehicles, need to be treated differently compared to a consumer who is consuming a YouTube video in a car. So this kind of differentiation in terms of APIs, quality of service, and so on and so forth is a fundamental thing. With respect to the traffic infrastructure, the situation is, from my perspective, from our perspective, completely different. We have some very good examples. In Europe, it's the Netherlands, for instance. The Netherlands, they have a very clear investment program to install in all the traffic lights, a so-called, these traffic lights a smart traffic lights. It's called Talking Traffic. It's a great program, and they want to equip 95% of their traffic lights within the next 8 years, something like that, until 2030. And that's a great example. If you compare this, and I'm German, if you compare this to Germany, it's a bit like a nightmare, I can tell you, because all the road operators, all the different authorities, all the different public entities, they have different perspective, different opinions, different ways how to do this, and it will cost us, if we are going with that pace, the next upcoming 2 decades, if something happens. And most likely, if I hear from my British colleagues, the situation is the same in Great Britain. Yeah. So this is something where we definitely need to work as a society to convince also our regulators, the public authorities, the road operators, that these kind of smart investment is not big money, it's not huge amount of investment, but to equip every kind of construction work with some sort of communication technology so that the construction work is informing the drivers which are approaching. It's not a huge thing. It's a couple of 100 or maybe 1,000 or 2,000 pounds investment into one construction work. You can easily multiply and put the equation. You can offer this kind of information at publicly available interfaces, and you have it immediately in all the HEREs, TomToms, and all the navigation systems. And it will create a big safety impact. This kind of, let's say, investment style, we need to motivate and we need to facilitate in all the societies around the globe. By the way, the Chinese are doing a lot of things exactly in this direction, and because they are very well structured and hampering the whole thing through the procedures, they are doing the job.
I mean, Amelia, when you listen to your colleagues up here talking about the challenges and opportunities, but some of the challenges and gaps still in infrastructure, in security methods, and so on and so forth, and regulation, I mean, does that give you any cause for concern about the sort of the ideal conditions, if you like, for investing in tech and autonomous vehicles?
Yeah, obviously regulation is very important because your companies want a stable ground to be working in. I think in the UK, some of our startups in the past we've seen being sold very early, earlier than we would have liked, to bigger players in the market, and so they end up being owned by bigger US players. That's beginning to change, and one of the reasons for that is we now have more funding, more talent here to grow and scale these businesses. But it is still an issue, and funding is one of the major problems in the UK. So if you're a bigger company and you want to raise 100 million of equity, which is what it will be because you won't be able to access the debt markets if you're a loss-making company, if you're focused on growing, then to raise that bigger 100 million round, you probably have to look for overseas investors. And that's quite frustrating for us as investors. I have one example, a company called Poly.ai, which is automating call centers. It works with Volkswagen amongst 50 other customers. If you phone up a Beefeater and want to book a table, then you will speak to a Poly.ai bot. All of its funding, apart from that initial funding, has come from the US and Canada. And so it's those investors and those people that then make a return on what has come from a Cambridge startup. And so that's frustrating that we can't find the capital here in the UK to support that business. And then the second reason that it struggles with growth here is finding the suitable talent to really grow a fast, high-tech business. And so when you look at a senior management team, the CFO, the chief commercial officer, the chief product officer, we have recruited all of those from the US because we could not find the suitable talent in the UK. And that's also frustrating, but that will get better as we scale more businesses and then people start to pour out of those companies and then they go back into the early stage.
So as we're sort of approaching question time, really, but just a couple of thoughts, really, I open it up to any of you who really wants to put in their 2 pennies, but what would be a really key, extra, special one good thing that could help the progression of this sector? I mean, from the insurance point of view, Lee.
Yes, I mentioned it, which was getting the act through that's currently in the committee stage, but then really focusing on all the requirements to make this ecosystem operate. And that's a huge amount of work for the next year and a half, 2 years. It's underway. There are discussions. Obviously, the ABI and Thatcher are at the centre of that, and it's really good to see the industry joined up, but there's a long way to go. And you heard the US comment around the UK are not there yet, even compared to Europe. And obviously our competitors aren't just in the European Union, they're much wider. So in terms of whether it's manufacturers, whether it's insurers, or anybody else involved in the ecosystem, it's getting the requirements sorted out in the UK and quickly, because clearly we've lost time against others.
And Joe, what do you think? What would be the one thing which would really help your business?
I mean, I think for the industry, it's sort of that open collaboration piece, which is a challenge when you've got private companies competing against each other. So I think that's definitely a challenge for the industry. For us, we're really focused on behaviour change. We're trying to create a global standard for addressing, right? We're not postcodes here and zip codes in the US, but one address system that everyone works everywhere for everyone. And that is a big challenge. So very much, driving adoption, getting partners, getting consumers to use what 3 words and engage with it. So that's our big focus for now.
See, Andrew, I hear everybody talking about open data sharing, collaboration, and yet you're very concerned about that from a security point of view. So what's your...
No, not necessarily concerned. I think, actually, I'd argue that collaboration is even more required in cybersecurity. And I think we've seen breaking down of silos within organizations and the car companies, where it's no longer this little team that's squirreled away in a basement somewhere, but they are starting to become more cross-functional. But some of the cross kind of company initiatives, like the Auto ISAC activities, I don't think the culture's there yet within the automotive industry to kind of really share vulnerabilities and risks that are coming out in a way that everyone can benefit from. So there's still a little bit of kind of holding on. And I think that's a risk for the business. So I'd say a mindset and culture change that moves away from seeing security as something that we shouldn't talk about to something that we actually do openly talk about.
Questions, ladies and gentlemen? Lights up, microphones out. Yes, hand up right at the back there. Do you want to wait for a microphone? And say who you are, please. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Katie. Donald Gillespie from Unigloves. Question for Lee from Aviva related to autonomous vehicles. You mentioned it'd be difficult to see who's liable when a vehicle is in an accident whilst in autonomous mode. Does that mean that the current technology doesn't provide you with sufficient data?
Well, I think the short answer is we're not sure, because we've got very little use case. It's partly why we're running the Darwin project to see how data is, the quality of data and how it's retrieved. And a lot of the accidents that we're insurers for obviously involve mostly non-autonomous. So our use case, our practical examples are very small, and it's difficult for insurers to get certainty around limited examples. So I think that's what I'm referring to. In cases where we have had claims involving vehicles, we haven't had problems determining where fault lies, and we've got the benefit of a clear statutory footing. But it's going to change as the volume and the type of vehicle, and particularly around driver confusion about what it is their cars can and cannot do. And the SMMT guide around marketing for autonomous has been really helpful to try and resolve claims around driverless or hands-off, feet off, as it were, type driving. And that may need to be hard-coded into statutory law in due course, but it's seen a real change in the environment in the UK. But driver confusion about what their cars can do, I think it was in 2018 that a comprehensive study about driverless had 7 out of 10 consumers saying they thought that there were already in 2018 vehicles that had full autonomous capability and they could be used in that mode. That gives you a sense of driver and consumer confusion.
Can I just add something there? There's no shortage of data as such in the industry. If anything, there's too much data. I think when there's an incident or an event, the car company or the supplier or both of them together have to go back and reconstruct that event. And it's actually quite painful to kind of go through all of that camera data or any other kind of data that they've got and re-simulate what happened and why it happened. These systems aren't like a simple kind of if this and that type system. As we get more kind of advanced, it takes on a mind of its own. And so kind of replicating what happened in that event can take a lot of time and effort. And that's where I think the industry is trying to kind of build tools to automate some of that and simulate what happened and be able to feed that to insurers and say, well, actually, this is not just what it did, but why it did it.
Interesting. Another question? Is that, oh, yes. An eager hand here in the front.
Steve Berry from Angoka. Just on the subject of cybersecurity, interesting fact is the financial services industry spends around 13 to 14% of their IT budget on cyber. The automotive industry, including factories, it's only 3 to 4%. So they're lagging behind enormously.
Yeah.
But if you take keyless entry, and the industry is losing hundreds of millions in terms of fraud, that problem is solvable right now with technology. So what is it about the industry and collaboration where they can't solve a problem that's there already?
I think, not to pick on the JLR story, but that was kind of the one that's been in the news the most. Part of it is that actually it's not a JLR problem. A lot of vehicles have these vulnerabilities with relay attacks and the countermeasures, you're right, have been around for a while and could have been implemented. There were decisions not to implement it at certain points that have come back to bite them. But it's really hard as a car company to be able to assess risk and the cost associated with dealing with that risk in a vacuum. And you never know, are you spending enough? Are you spending it on the right things? Actually, spending on cyber in the automotive industry is growing really quickly. We've forecast that by next year, vehicle manufacturers will be spending about $10 billion between them. The teams they're growing are huge. We're now getting to the level of 100, 150, 200 cyber experts within these car companies, which is getting them closer bit by bit to other sectors, like you said, that are kind of leading the way. But there's still that kind of really difficult question of how much is enough. And I think that's what all cyber teams in every company faces. It's like you just never know. But that's where collaboration can help, because everyone sees a small part of the puzzle, and no one really stands to benefit if autonomous vehicles get hacked. That the trust will be broken across brands. No one will be able to differentiate self-driving vehicles based on how few people have been killed in those vehicles, right? As soon as people start getting killed in those vehicles because they've been hacked or because they've had problems, everything shuts down.
One more question. In the middle here, yeah?
Hi, yeah, it's Charlie from Cinter again. Sorry for hogging the mic, but it's a really good event and I've got lots of questions. Maybe this is for Lee, but how do we encourage OEMs to standardize and share access to data, critical for the full benefits of autonomy? I know we have the MVBO, but it's not really working, even though it's been in place for about 9 months now. It's still really difficult to collaborate with some of these big players, and interested to hear your thoughts on that.
It is, and I'll just do it very quickly, but the point about collaboration is key. Obviously, discussions and involvement continue with the manufacturers. I think they all see the huge advantages. It's going to get picked up in the statutory requirement part of the process that's coming, and that will help solve the clarity around access to data, the speed of access, as well as the complete downloading of, say, an accident event. So it's because it's evolving, there is no finalised position. This is going to keep moving, and it will develop as we go forward.
We have to call it a day, ladies and gentlemen, because we've got a couple of keynotes still to fit in before it's home time. But listen, thank you. That was a fascinating panel, and you were great panellists. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you.